Over the last 5 months, Marco Rubio has targeted lawfully present non-citizens for deportation based on constitutionally protected speech criticizing Israel.
Okay, guys, we've got to talk about big news that just came down the pike about the Trump administration getting hit with a massive free speech lawsuit for some of its immigration actions it's taken, revoking people's visas over speech they've made or ideas they've expressed or articles they've written about Israel. So this lawsuit was just announced by the Nonpartisan Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE, where, disclaimer, I do a little bit of freelance work for them. Here's their video announcing this lawsuit.
Can Marco Rubio deport legal non-citizens for speech he doesn't like? Federal statute says he can, but the First Amendment says otherwise. Over the last 5 months, Marco Rubio has targeted lawfully present non-citizens for deportation based on constitutionally protected speech criticizing Israel. He's relied on two statutes to do this. The first allows him to deport any non-citizen if they express an opinion that he thinks threatens American foreign policy. That's what they used against Mahmoud Khalil when they didn't like what he had to say. And the second allows him to revoke any non-citizen's visa at any time for any reason, including based on constitutionally protected speech. That's what happened to Ramesia Oster after she co-authored an op-ed critical of Israel. That violates the First Amendment. No court has answered the question, can the Secretary of State deport a legally present non-citizen because of their protected speech? And that's where FIRE comes in. Citizen or not, criticizing American foreign policy is not a crime. It is a constitutional right that we all share. But since January, the Trump administration's message for non-citizens couldn't be clear. Watch what you say or else. This is America. No one should fear a midnight knock on their door because they voiced the wrong opinion. That's why we're suing Marco Rubio in defense of our clients and all legal non-citizens who are afraid to speak their mind right now. Because liberty does not come from the government. The right to speak your mind is a right that belongs to everyone, that the government can never take away. That is what makes America exceptional. And no idea is more foreign to what makes this country great than punishing people because of their protected speech.
So we're going to get into more details here, but my initial reaction is just that I support this lawsuit. I would rather, and set your opinions aside about the underlying conflict between Israel and Palestine, the war with Hamas, all of that, because this is actually about the principle here, not the specific speech in question. I would rather live in a country where people are free to speak their minds, people who are here legally, we're talking about immigrants in this case, rather than one where the immigration enforcement might kick down their doors and arrest them if they say the wrong thing in a newspaper article, like what happened to Romesa Ozturk and others. And in this case, it's being done to people, and no, it's not just people who support Hamas, a designated terror group, it's people who just criticize Israel, like Romesa Ozturk and others. And I would rather live in a country where the government does not have the power to do that, because a future president that is progressive and hates Israel could just as easily use these federal statutes that Marco Rubio is invoking to deport anyone who supports Israel or supports the IDF or anything like that. It's a very dangerous game, and I think it's just fundamentally inconsistent with the ethos of free speech and the letter of the First Amendment, which doesn't actually say only for citizens. It limits what the government can do. And it says that the federal government can make no law abridging the freedom of speech or press. It doesn't say asterisk only for U.S. citizens. And multiple Supreme Court cases have found that First Amendment rights do extend to legal immigrants. We're not talking about illegal immigrants here. That's a separate debate. But for legal immigrants, they do have some degree of protection. And even the late conservative Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia acknowledged that they enjoy some extent of First Amendment rights. So once you accept that premise, it seems pretty clear to me that these federal statutes, which are incredibly vague, dangerously vague and broad, that the Trump administration is invoking, are unconstitutional and should be struck down. Now, more details from FIRE's lawsuit here. America's founding principle is that liberty comes not from the government, but is an inherent right of every individual. Every person, whether they are a U.S. citizen, are visiting for the week, or here on a student visa, has free speech rights in this country. Two lawful residents of the United States holding the same sign at the same protest shouldn't be treated differently just because one is here on a visa, said FIRE legal director Will Creeley. The First Amendment bars the government from punishing protected speech, period. In our free country, you shouldn't have to show your papers to speak your mind. Now, the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, so the clients that FIRE is representing and suing the government on behalf of these clients, is an interesting collection of people, here again from FIRE. Plaintiffs in FIRE's lawsuit represent the wide range of groups and individuals whose speech is threatened by the continued assault on non-citizens' protected speech. The Stanford Daily, the independent student-run newspaper at Stanford University, where writers with student visas are declining assignments related to the conflict in the Middle East, worried that even reporting on the war will endanger their immigration status. They're also suing on behalf of Jane and John Doe, two legal non-citizens with no criminal record who engaged in pro-Palestinian speech and now fear deportation and visa revocation because of their expression. There's real fear on campus, and it reaches into the newsroom, said Greta Reich, editor-in-chief of the Stanford Daily. I've had reporters turn down assignments, request the removal of some of their articles, and even quit the paper because they fear deportation for being associated with speaking on political topics, even in a journalistic capacity. The Daily is losing the voices of a significant portion of our student population. I think the story here from the Stanford Daily kind of gets at the reason kind of these sorts of policies or cracking down on speech like this is so pernicious. It creates this chilling atmosphere where people are afraid to speak their minds, afraid to write the wrong thing or the government will come get them. That to me just seems totally un-American. And I don't believe that we need a safe space from criticism of Israel or even anti-Semitism, which is subjective and people disagree on what constitutes anti-Semitism. I don't think we need safe spaces for these things any more than we do from racism, homophobia, sexism, transphobia, and all the other things where conservatives rightly reject this safe space mentality. I don't know why, for some people on the right, free speech becomes a nuanced question that they make a lot of exceptions to the second that Israel gets involved. To me, that makes no sense. You either believe in these principles across the board or you don't. Having an exception for one specific issue does not make sense. Now, one point I want to acknowledge is that Fire's lawsuit does not argue, and I certainly don't contend, that the Trump administration cannot revoke the visas and deport people who engage in criminal activity or who get suspended from their university for bad behavior. So if you're one of these students who came here and engaged in crimes, if you in any way provided material support for Hamas, a designated terror group, that is a crime. You can be charged with that crime. You can have your visa revoked and you can be deported. Even if you get suspended from school for engaging in an encampment, a disruptive protest, you could have your visa reviewed and repealed, taken away for that behavior. That's all fine. I don't object to that, and I don't think Fire does either. What we're saying is that people who are legally in this country have the right to speak their mind and express themselves, same as an American, and that we do not need government speech police cracking down on their ideas and speech and arresting and deporting people because their ideas displease the state. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills, and anyone on the Republican or conservative side would disagree with that basic message. More from Fire here. Fire aims to stop the government's use of the two provisions that stand counter to our ideals as a nation, provisions that in their expansive scope and unchecked authority are more at home in countries like China and Russia than in a free America. By defeating these provisions, no administration of any party will be able to weaponize them against individuals for expression disfavored by the government. And that's the key point here. Even if you support, in theory, the crackdown of anti-Israel radicals on college campuses, you shouldn't support it in principle, because the same principles and powers and authorities used here could and frankly will, if allowed to stand, be used against you and the ideas you agree with. Censorship is never, ever a one-way street. It always ends up going both ways. So be careful what you wish for and be careful what you support if you're somebody who believes in free speech and free expression. That's why I'm rooting for Fire. I hope they succeed in this lawsuit, and I will be following it with great interest. What do you guys think? Do you disagree with me on this one? I'm open to hearing you out. I'm all about free expression after all. Let me know in the comments. Hit that like button while you're at it and make sure to subscribe.